Buenas tardes a todos, mi nombre es Marcela García y les queremos dar la cordial bienvenida al primer seminario virtual producido por US Rice Producers. Empezaremos con nuestro primer ponente, Dwight Roberts, que obviamente no necesita introducción. Entonces, Dwight, si puedes, por favor, te voy a pasar el micrófono.
Muy bien. ¿Me escucha, Marcela? Verónica, ¿sí? Buenas tardes, compañeros del arroz. Decidimos organizar esta reunión porque hemos recibido tantas preguntas y comentarios sobre el mercado y la cosecha que estamos pasando en este momento mismo. Hoy tenemos gente en esta reunión de como 10 países, incluyendo Estados Unidos. Tenemos las figuras importantes en México, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panamá, Colombia y varias de la República Dominicana. Realmente es un año más que inolvidable. Yo comparo la situación realmente a esta película cine La Tormenta Perfecta, porque en Estados Unidos, ustedes saben, en el 2019 sembramos 500,000 acres de grano largo, menos que el año anterior de eso. Y después vino en el 2019 lluvias intensas en la delta que causó muchos problemas, especialmente en el porcentaje de enteros en el molino, rendimiento en el molino, que nos forzó a enmolinar mucho más arroz para obtener los granos enteros necesarios para el paquete de arroz. Entonces, para enero 2020, no había arroz paddy en manos de productores y seguimos para febrero empezó a subir el precio un poco y después vino como en la película la tormenta, esa ola enorme que para nosotros y algunos de ustedes fue la primera semana de marzo cuando la realidad del virus nos pegó muy fuerte acá. Y la reacción era un pánico porque la gente no entendía lo que estaba pasando en un sentido. Walmart, Costco, Sam's Club, los supermercados empezaron a pedir triple de lo normal para los porque los estantes en el supermercado estaban vaciando arroz, frijoles, papel higiénico, máscara, jabón de manos, lo que sea. Y hubo un realmente pánico como pasó en todos los países y igual ustedes con nosotros. Entonces, de repente Estados Unidos estaba técnicamente fuera del mercado, precios muy elevados, poco existencia de paddy, y para la primera vez que en mis 22, 23 años en el arroz, técnicamente Estados Unidos no tenía paddy para vender en New Orleans, para cargar un barco en New Orleans. Nunca vi eso en todos los años. Y así que terminó eso. Ustedes, por supuesto, miraron hacia Mercosur, la oferta de su cosecha con razón, y para manejar la demanda en sus países. Y así seguimos, y después Estados Unidos inició la siembra fines de febrero, parte fuerte en la delta, marzo, abril, terminamos sembrando 25% más del año pasado, año anterior, en grano largo. El grano mediano realmente no hubo enorme cambio. Entonces, con eso, la tormenta perfecta hoy en día, más todavía, está en Mercosur, porque jamás pensábamos que Brasil iba a empezar a pedir paddy de Estados Unidos. Los mercados domésticos en el Mercosur, la demanda más fuerte que anticiparon. Yo entiendo en Brasil y Argentina el consumo del arroz aumentó hoy en día 25%. Es algo sumamente interesante. Y entonces el Mercosur hoy en día está bastante ya vendido. Paraguay, Argentina, Uruguay y Brasil. Y ahora Brasil está pidiendo cotizaciones de paddy en Estados Unidos, aunque todavía nosotros el único lugar donde hay paddy en Estados Unidos para cargar un barco pronto sería Puerto de Lake Charles, Puerto de Houston, pero no es muy simple y no es muy fácil con las rutinas, las agendas de cada puerto. Brasil, yo dije tormenta perfecta ahí también porque primero Brasil tuvo uno de sus más bajos años de producción de arroz en varios años. Exportó más paddy de lo normal porque con el cambio del dólar fue mejor negocio exportar paddy en vez de vender en el mercado doméstico. Y después vino el virus súper fuerte en Brasil que está pasando ahora mismo y está pegando la situación ahí bastante duro. Para mí la noticia ahora más importante en un sentido como la realidad es la sequía que está pasando en el Mercosur. Ustedes saben que el Mercosur, el riego de arroz en Mercosur es por reservorios de agua, lagos, etcétera. Muy poco de bombeo, de pozo, prácticamente nada. Y están muy bajos los niveles. Y entiendo que si no hay suficiente lluvia antes del 1 de octubre o antes de primera quincena de octubre, se van a reducir la siembra en el Mercosur. Estuve hablando con un productor importante en Entre Ríos, Argentina, que para mí es muy parecido a la Delta en Estados Unidos, porque los productores tienen alternativas de cambiar sus ideas de siembra, soja, maíz, y entiendo que varios ya están decididos de no sembrar tanto arroz y sembrar sorgo más. Entonces, yo entiendo que hay un efecto de la niña por encima. Entiendo que en Paraguay, en algunas áreas del país, hay problemas de agua potable, agua para beber. Y entonces, esa noticia y la posibilidad de una siembra reducida en Mercosur complica el mercado cada vez más. La cosecha en el Mercosur inicia recién fin de diciembre y realmente antes fin de enero o el mes de febrero, uno no puede pensar en la exportación de paddy de Mercosur. Es mucho tiempo, es 6 meses en adelante. Así que es tanto de que mirar cómo va el progreso ahí, pero todas esas condiciones, por eso quisimos conversar con ustedes, avisar a ustedes cómo se ve, perdón, por encima de todo eso, en estos días noticias que Irak puede recibir financiamiento del Banco Exim, Import-Export de Estados Unidos. Ustedes saben que Irak consume 1 millón de toneladas paddy mensual. Es muy posible, otros dicen probable, Irak va a estar comprando bastante arroz. Así que hoy es el 20 de agosto y por dónde vamos. Yo no tengo la pelota cristal acá en la oficina de la casa mío, pero yo ahora quiero pasar a Thomas Wynn para que él hable un poco acerca del estado de la cosecha en Estados Unidos y cómo él ve las cosas de hoy en adelante. Así que si hay una pregunta para mí, pues se puede hacer más tarde o Marcela, ¿qué dijiste? Que envíen o pregunten ahora
Sí,
o pasamos a Thomas.
si tienen alguna pregunta para ti, no hemos visto nada que ha pasado aquí en el chat, entonces seguimos adelante, pero si alguien tiene una pregunta para Dwight, por favor indiquen que es para Dwight y regresamos con él.
Ok,
Y ahorita ya vamos
Thomas.
con Thomas. Bueno, pondremos la presentación de Thomas y ahí está Thomas. Bienvenido, Thomas.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. It's a pleasure to visit with the rice industry participants, as always. Just one moment. Okay, here we are. Again, it's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to visit with everybody this afternoon. Dennis and I are going to change it up a little bit this time. We normally would start with the global outlook and bring it down to a more local level. But we felt that with the current situation, especially with harvest in the United States being so early, that it might be better to begin with the local level with what we know and then back it out to a greater outlook. So for this particular presentation, I will be giving more of the quality and in the field, if you will, data that we've seen. And then I'm going to hand it over to Dennis, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the global perspective and his outlook for the longer term market. So, without further ado, we'll start out with Texas and Southwest Louisiana. The acreage, the area planted is pretty consistent with what USDA has been estimating, which is about 150,000 acres of commercial rice in Texas and around 380,000 in Louisiana. Early field yields have been coming in fairly high. We're seeing somewhere between 8 to 12,000 pounds an acre, or 3.5 to 5.5 tons per acre. Most of this rice is hybrid varieties. Probably less than 10% in Texas is going to be a commercial 153 Presidio Chenier type variety. Hybrids did dominate the market this year. The milling samples are still being dried in the dryers. We have not seen a very large quantity to date. However, the ones that we have seen are not the quality that we would normally like to. Those conventional varieties, which are, again, about 10 to 15% of the crop, we're seeing between 40 to 55 pound head rice on 68, 69 pound total. Hybrids are milling a little bit higher with that 54 to 60 pound head rice, probably closer to averaging 57, 58, with a little bit higher totals as well in that 72 to 74 range. The rice it had a lot of volume in the field. It has some late season rains, which has contributed to these lower milling qualities. Fortunately, we have not seen any sign of smut in any dried samples yet, but we still have quite a few samples yet to grade before we have a handle on what the Texas crop and Southwest Louisiana crop are going to look like. Moving to the east, Mississippi planted around 140,000 acres of commercial rice this year. Again, mostly hybrids, although they did have a little bit more of your conventionals than we saw further down the Gulf Coast. That particular region has not yet gotten into their main harvest, and so we're having to estimate and project what we think is going to happen. We do know that they had some early season rains and some cooler temperatures that did not contribute to the rice development. As the season progressed, the weather itself seemed to normalize with more consistent rainfall and warmer temperatures. That suggested that the rice could easily come through it and give them some more normal yields. However, given the development factors, it's probably going to be a little bit below what we saw last year on a field yield wise standard. Moving north into Arkansas and Missouri, which is where again most of the long grain is planted. Combined, they're about 1.5 million acres of long grain. Arkansas reports from the ground at least suggest that there are fewer acres that are going to be harvested than what has been reported, largely due to insurance claims and other environmental factors that have reduced that acreage. That being said, it has not substantially detracted from acres, and they're still going to have a very large crop coming out of that upper delta. Production-wise, they had a lot of rain at planting, which disrupted their schedule. Some growers were in the fields at the planting deadline, if you will, using whatever methods they had available to plant the rice, and a lot of it was not done the way it would normally be done, which will contribute to a lower field yield and lower quality. The late emergence as a result of being delayed in planting is going to have an impact on the crop, along with some weather stress during flowering. Rice is a very resilient crop, and so it's difficult to project yields at this time. They will most likely be close to, even maybe slightly below what we saw last year, but when combined with the increase in acreage, it still is going to be a very, very large crop. Looking backwards, we're talking about, we spent a lot of time the last two slides talking about the environmental factors, and the only thing that we can do without having field data is to look at analog years. We could jump back into 2010 or 2014 where we did see those larger crops with lower quality. Given the consistent lower yields we're seeing in other parts of the rice production region, some milling quality issues are probable. Also, given the size of the prospective crop, storage is now becoming a concern. Looking at the cash market, and I'm going to talk about near-term factors here, being near-term being now until October, and then long-term for this presentation being October through first part of December. On the near-term outlook, we do have a very large crop that's coming in from the fields in a very short period of time. It is stressing the infrastructure capacity. A lot of the infrastructure that we had in place in the past has been disrupted as a result of the turbulence in the current world. Large near-term volumes are going to need to move. Some of them already have a home. Some are still looking. The domestic market for milled rice has gotten very, very strong as a result of the coronavirus and other concerns. It has also seen some supply contractions as a result of disruptions in the supply chain, which is why the next bullet point has a question mark behind coronavirus, because it has conflicting impacts on the ultimate price. Over in Mississippi, that price is going to be dependent on what the river traffic looks like. I would suggest that early season, the early lots that come off are going to be a little bit more valuable because they will be ready to ship, but that'll largely be determined by the quality and the yield and the global environment at the time. Harvest timing is probably another 3 to 4 weeks out, although some early fields will be harvested prior. Once we begin to see some of the milling yields and the field yields from that part of the world, we'll have some indication as to what the river market will look like for the rest of the year. In Arkansas and Missouri, again, we have no real clue as to what the actual production is going to be, and late season weather can definitely come into play, which will impact what their field yields and quality are going to be. I know we have some hurricanes that are supposedly moving into the Gulf. I think that's probably going to happen. If they stay on track, then Arkansas could see some heavy rains as they get closer to harvest over the next 10 days that will impact the rice to a certain agronomic level at least. Arkansas and Missouri are also very dependent on the river market. They technically drive the river market. And once they become harvested and marketable, then they will drive the river market. Arkansas will dictate largely what the price is going to be. However, as I've mentioned, the domestic rice market has gotten a lot more lucrative, and so the domestic mills may become a little bit more competitive on the river than what they have been in the past. Long-term carryout numbers could change drastically, and I say that because if we do have the lower milling yields that we're expecting right now, then it will take more paddy to generate the whole grain outturns in the milled market, which will consume the carryout at a much more rapid pace than we would normally see on a 55-70 basis. So to bring it all back together, we do have a large crop, which is going to support the current low pricing, at least in the near term. What could change this would be some buying interest from South America. We have had inquiries from some areas in that Mercosur region that do not typically buy or traditionally buy U.S. rice. And there's also the likelihood that some of our more traditional markets could step in and take the opportunity to take advantage of the pricing as it sits right now. Domestic demand as a supply and demand equation, at least, is definitely tilted in favor of milled rice, largely from the coronavirus and its impacts on both the mills and the short-term demand in the grocery stores. Later season, again, is defined by late October through December, is going to depend on what we see quality and quantity-wise over the next 2 months. Guessing right now, the price will strengthen on export demand and the domestic mill business as the year progresses. I do not see prices going down any significant amount as the year goes on. That obviously can change, but the demand curve right now is set up to consume what we have the overage at the moment. With that being said, I'm going to stop, open it for questions, and hand it over to Dennis whenever we have satisfied all of the curiosity. Thank you.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you so much. At this point, we do not have questions for you. If anybody is interested in sending Thomas a question, please specify in the Q&A icon, and we will get back to you after Dennis's presentation. Again, thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank you, myself.
All right. I think everybody's, I think you're waiting on me, right? So we will do this. Hopefully this works. Okay, so look all right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Austin, Texas. This is where I'm at right now. And I have a big picture window in front of me so I can look outside, and I've got a nice thunderstorm headed my way, which I certainly would like to see happen. It has been an interesting year, and I have said to many people, I have never seen a year like this. And I want to tell you, I hope I never see a year like this ever again. It is a very difficult year to determine the market direction, because every time we turn around, something else changes. As Thomas has gone through the storyline of what is occurring in the fields right now and what the rice actually looks like right now, I'm going to start to move us higher and move us to maybe a larger elevation, maybe go up to that 60,000 foot level so that we can take a look at what the conditions are in the market overall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all cover the current U.S. supply and demand as we see it and some of the changes that may be in that arena. Then I'm going to talk about the current world supply and demand. I want to go over what that looks like and how that is changing in some of the areas there that we have concern on. And we'll talk a little bit about price then at that point in time. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up with a look at the COVID-19 situation and its impact on the economic environment. And maybe answer one of the questions that people ask is, how does that really affect the price of rice? And certainly, as Thomas has already gone through, there are some conditions that are out there that can affect the price of rice at this particular point in time based off COVID. So let's start first of all with the rice fundamentals. I always like to talk about the trend of supply. It's not the actual number usually as much as it is the trend. However, again, this year is very different, and I'll show you that here in just a few minutes. We want to see the trend of demand, and are we headed in the right direction? And are we producing more than we are consuming? Are we producing more faster than what we're consuming? Those are trends that we need to look at. I'm not going to talk much about the government's activity because right now the main thing that I would be talking about in that regard is how they are supporting producers who are having issues, and the economy itself, whether it be the Federal Reserve or the U.S. Congress. And market psychology, those perceptions right now are all over the place. And I will address that a little bit at the very end. I want to go back to March the 31st. And if I go back to March 31st and look at what the USDA was thinking was going to happen, this was the projections that were made on March 31st to the number of acres that we were going to have in the long grain rice. The expectations were that we were going to have about a 1.778 million acres of long grain. That was in 2019. And so the projection was that we were going to go up to 2.1 million acres. That would be a 322,000 acre increase. As we all know, what happens is many times when we get started, conditions change. And we began to see corn prices plummet, soybeans prices began to plummet, and producers realized that there was going to be a shortage of rice. And so in many areas, we saw an actual shift in the idea of acres, and they moved more to planting rice than what they originally thought. So this was the June 30th report. This is what actually the numbers ended up. Again, 1.778 last year, planting this year up to 2.192. That's 92,000 more acres than what we planted in the or what was expected. And overall, it was a 414,000 acre increase from the area that was planted in 2019. Now, what's really interesting is when you take a look at this and we set it up from a harvested standpoint, the harvested number of acres in 2019, 1.73 million acres.
Hey, Dennis.
Yes.
Sorry. Could you switch your screens just so people can get a better view of the numbers, please?
Oh, am I on the screen over here? Yeah,
Yes.
I certainly can do that. Yeah, you see what's coming before I do. All right, let me try this here. How's that?
Thank
That
you.
works. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. So the screen's changed on me there. All right, so this is where we're at now. This is the actual June 30th report, and the harvested acres are now expected to be up to 426,000 acres. So we actually had, obviously last year with all the rain and the prevented planting that we had, we didn't harvest the normal percentage. And so this year it looks like we're on target to have this big acre increase of 426,000 acres actually harvested, more than what we harvested last year. So obviously, when you start putting in 426,000 acres, then it's pretty obvious that we're going to see a larger supply, right? So let's take a look at this from a standpoint of the supply and demand numbers. Let me start first of all with just looking at the beginning stocks. And when you look at the beginning stocks number, you can see 32.6 to 14.2 beginning. This is the beginning number. Now, what's really interesting about this number right here is we basically were out of rice. We've just ran out of rice. And so this number right here becomes what we call the pipeline minimum. That means that the USDA is not going to let this number go down more than 14 million hundredweights. When we get to 14 million hundredweights, technically we are out of rice. And so that was a very interesting number. And I'm just going to throw that out to you, is that we have a pipeline that has to have 14 million hundredweights in it. So then we look at production for 2020. You can see the big increase here because of the acres, obviously the harvested acres. Imports are going to be down just a little bit, according to the USDA. And so the total supply is going to be up from 187.7 million hundredweights up to 202.3. So you can see we're up about 25 million hundredweights of total supply. Now the USDA, as far as demand goes, they say domestic use is going to be up a little bit. We know for a fact that the rice on the shelves here in the United States has not returned to normal. We've had several people tell us that we have not seen the rice get back on the shelves as we normally would, and that's because of, obviously, we're not able to mill much rice at this point in time, if any, as we are basically out of rice here in the States. So the domestic usage is expected to actually be up a little bit as they refill the pipeline. Now, when we look at exports, the USDA says right now up about 4 million hundredweights compared to last year. And of course, that's going to be subject to price. But again, we're expecting some pent-up demand that is going to probably surface. And so we would expect that number to be pretty close to being correct. So total usage is actually going to be up, even in a year that we are going to produce more, that you would expect to see prices actually decline a little bit. But that's not what they're saying, is that based off of this, we're going to see total usage up compared to what we were expecting earlier. So ending stocks from 14.2 up to 24.3. And that is the current carryover number that the USDA has out. Obviously, it's about 71%, so it's definitely a better number than what we've had in 2019. As we look at the actual numbers over the last 11 years here, you can see the ending stocks 10 years ago or 11 years ago, 35.6 compared to 24.3. In fact, this number right here, I believe, is the fifth largest carryover number you're going to see over the last 11 years and the fourth highest in the last 10 years. But that's the current carryover number, and you can see the usage number continuing to go up. It's the third highest at 178 million hundredweights at this point in time. Average farm price. This is at the farm. Right now, the USDA projects the 2020 average farm price at $11.60 a hundredweight, which would be $255 a metric ton. Obviously, that's at the farm, so you have to move it into locations, so the costs would be higher in order to get it to different locations for shipping. But that is the current average farm price that the USDA has out there right now for the 2020 crop year. So as we take a look at the U.S. supply and demand, we now want to put that into what it looks like in the current world picture and what that looks like. So if we take the current usage and ending stocks for the world and you put it across there, you can see that the ending stocks number continues to go up, 181.7 million metric tons at the end of 2019, and the USDA now expects that number to go up to 185.2, of which 116.5 is located in China. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of take China out of the picture here, and I want to just talk about the 5 major exporting countries so that we can kind of see what they're doing. As we look at the ending stocks number for these 5 countries, look at these numbers for India as we go from 23 million metric tons up to 35 million metric tons in 2019. And according to the USDA number that just came out in the August report, they're now expecting that number to go up to 38 million metric tons. Now, just remember that number because I'm going to come back to it in a few seconds. But I want to show you that Thailand, which had been had the big ending stocks after they went through the intervention program, they have finally gotten back to where they're more normal at 4.39 million metric tons. And India, way up here at 38 million metric tons. One has to wonder exactly what type of condition that 38 million metric tons is in. But as we look at this from just the world exporting countries and the carryover in million metric tons, you can see we were headed in the right direction into 2016. And these 5 countries were down to 28.6 million metric tons of inventory. Since then, we have started to go back up, and the number projected for the 2020 year is 45.5 million metric tons. Now, of that, this is the amount that is India. So you can see that India is the big block here. What that does is that says that if there's any kind of issues with India, the rest of the 4 countries that would be in position to export rice, there's not a lot of volume there. So India, again, the big number here, and one has to wonder just exactly what kind of condition that rice is in that they have so much of it. And I'm going to come back to that number again here in just a minute. When we look at the cash world prices as of today compared to last year, you're not going to be surprised by this. U.S. prices are up from $555 to $625. Thailand is up from $422 to $488. Vietnam, $365 up to $490. We're looking at India from $370 up only 15. Obviously, they've got the big supply. But they're up $15 a ton at $385, and Pakistan $375 up to $445. Now, obviously, this is milled rice, but we have to put it in the milled category in order to do a good comparison. The $625 per ton pretty well prices us out of the market, and that's what it should be doing because we don't have any rice. So as the rice comes on for the 2020 crop, then the question is how fast can we fill in the holes and what happens to this price. So we'll be monitoring that, of course, very closely over the next several weeks as more rice gets dried and is in a position where it can be exported or milled. I like to follow this from a standpoint of what is the situation with Thailand. And right now we're $137 a ton higher than Thailand is at this particular point in time. That's substantial. We like to be within $60 to $80 a ton, and 137 pretty much prices us out. And again, that's what you would expect given the fact that there's very little rice supply in the United States. When we look at export volumes, you can see Thailand, the last time they were the leading exporter was in 2010. Since then, it's all been India. And India is expected in 2020 to have a export number of around 11 million metric tons. Now, remember that number I told you to remember? 38 million metric tons. Yeah, they've got almost 4 years worth of supply at this particular time frame. So they've got a lot of inventory. U.S. average, by the way, over the last 10 years, 3.23 million metric tons. So you can see even in 2020, we're expected to be just below what would be average over the last 10 years. So when we take a look at everything, both the U.S., the world numbers, and we kind of put that in perspective, here's what we're looking at from the overall rice fundamentals. And they're mixed. Just as Thomas was saying, there's both bullish and bearish conditions that are going on. U.S. rice acres are higher, and we're expecting that to be the case. Supply is going to be a little bit better in the longer term, but in the short term, there's a low supply, and we have to refill the pipeline. There's a lot of conditions that have to be filled. I like to say there's holes that are going to have to be filled in the market, and we're expecting that to occur here in the near term. but it's going to take a while, and that means we're going to see prices both low and high. And for producers here in the states, it's really difficult for them because they don't know whether they're going to be able to store it, for how long, if they're going to have to move it quickly, and what price they're going to have to take. So again, some holes that have to be filled, and so we're expecting some price variability here in the short term. Weather in the Delta is still a possible problem. It looks okay right now, but you never know. And certainly this next slide is going to tell you we really don't know what's going to happen. I took this off of my computer screen about 1 o'clock this afternoon. And what you're looking at right here are two storms. One storm that this is storm 13, this is storm 14. They have not been named as of yet. But you can see that if you follow these storms in, we're going to have two Gulf storms, both in the Gulf of Mexico. And this date right here, when you see this 1 and this S, are both August the 25th. I don't think I've ever seen two storms head towards the Gulf at the same time. But this blue dot up here is where they are expected to dissipate. And that would put Arkansas smack dab in the middle of major rainstorms and rain shield if those storms hit like this. Now, we got a long way to go. And certainly everybody knows that the weather models that calculate up what tropical storms are going to do are better than what they were just even 3 or 4 years ago. But they're certainly not accurate, and these storms can go in any direction. But it's something to watch. And so, as I say again, weather in the Delta looks okay right now, but it still could be an issue because this could have a major impact if it starts to become a big rain issue in Arkansas, just as they get ready to drain fields and start harvesting rice. So that is something to keep in the back of your mind, and certainly something to watch in the near term. The overall grades are going to also be an issue, as Thomas has mentioned. If the milling yield continues to be lower, we're going to have to mill through more rough rice to get to that head rice. So that's going to be an issue going forward as well. Now, the other question, and I think that both Dwight, although I couldn't understand him, I think he's probably gone through that, and I know Thomas mentioned it as well. We have some South American issues, and they are certainly something that we're going to have to keep in our minds. It's a question at this particular point in time if that's going to be an issue or not. So a lot of unknown fundamentals at this particular point in time, and certainly some outside market factors, which now also have to be considered. And that's where I'd like to go now and talk a little bit about the COVID-19 effects and what impacts it could have in the near term. So we've covered the world, U.S. supply, world supply. Let's go to COVID-19 and take a quick look at this. This is, again, just taken off of the internet about 3 hours ago. And so there's some of these locations that have not been filled in as far as today's news. But I think most of you probably are up to date on that, maybe even more than what I am. We monitor it, of course, and we know that the conditions are continuing to be of importance. And in certain areas, they continue to be more of a problem than other areas. Maybe some areas are getting better, some other areas are getting worse. We've got a ways to go on this, and we don't have an idea of when this is going to end. But you can see the numbers right now, 22.7 million cases in the world. And when we come across to the number of recovered, which is an important number, we're at 15.4 active cases at 6.5 million active cases at this particular point in time. And of course, we're seeing India right now with the biggest number of increases in new cases. And that is certainly a major concern around the world. Also, when you look at the number of tests that they're able to perform, they're not able to perform the number that they should be able to do when they have this kind of population at 1.3 billion, and they're not being able to keep up with these numbers. So India certainly is a concern, and again, they're the country that has the biggest supply of rice. So we start to realize that it's possible that export facilities are closed down, milling institutions are shut in. There's a lot of concern that begins to go into these numbers as we work forward. Taking a look at what I follow the closest is this chart right here. I get this on a daily basis, and what it is the number of tests in the United States compared to the positive readings. So this blue line, or the blue lines that you see here, are the daily number of tests, and you can see we topped out at about 126,000 tests in one day, and now we've dropped down to about 680,000. Now, the issue that we have, and of course, the red line is the number of positive cases. Of course, the issue that we have here is we can't tell you how many of these tests are being done on an individual for the second, third, fourth, or even fifth time. We can't tell you if the percent positive is a person that has been has had 4 or 5 tests that they're positive on. So we're not getting first-time tests to an individual or first-time positive results. I think longer term we'll be able to back into some of that information, but we're not able to get it right now, and so we don't really know what that situation is. But you can see that the number of tests overall appear to be headed down, but we haven't been able to really work the percent positive numbers lower than the 5% level. So this shows us that there is some trends that have changed that may be positive, but we still have a ways to go. So what I want to do is focus in on the way that we're looking at it here in the States and around the world in different areas, because there is some optimism. And I would tell you that right now, when you look at things from a standpoint of what people are looking at, we have some higher confidence that conditions may be getting a little bit better. Let me start with this chart right here. This is the MSCI, which is the capital investment from Morgan Stanley. And what it does is it shows the number of companies with downward revisions and the number of companies with upward provisions. And this comes from analysts that are looking at these different companies. So you can see what happened in March as the number of analysts that were putting out positive earnings per share just absolutely plummeted down into the middle of April. And the number of analysts that were putting out downward revisions shot way up. So at this particular point in time, all the revisions were pretty negative. But since then, you can see what's happened, and we have seen a cross as the analysts now, more of them are predicting better conditions on an earnings per share basis for companies than they are a lower. And so what we can say is that there is improving analyst confidence. They believe that things are definitely getting better. Now, of course, they're looking at data in order to come up with this, and a couple of things that they're looking at, we're going to show you. Let's start with the Purchasing Managers Index. This is where we see how companies are buying things. You can see the big dip that occurred right there as the COVID, what I call the COVID break actually occurred. And since then, as we work back higher, the services condition from the purchase managers, in other words, these are people that are buying services, has almost returned to pre-COVID levels, but not quite. But in the manufacturing, the actual manufacturing orders have returned to pre-COVID levels. And this is one of the reasons why we're seeing analysts feeling a little bit better about things, a little bit more confident. So now we can say we have improving business confidence as well. Let's look at another situation. This is restaurant reservations, a 7-day moving average that we're able to pull up. And we've got the United States here, Mexico, Canada. UK has gone positive. Germany went way positive, but now has been dropping back down. And Ireland is doing the very same thing. It had a very strong move, and then it's dropping back down. Some of this is weather related, not near all COVID related. But the bottom line is, if you go back into that April timeframe down here, you can see what is taking place as we move back higher on these numbers. So that indicates, again, that we're seeing some confidence, but this time that confidence is coming from the consumer. So we're having improving consumer confidence at this particular point in time as well. Let's take a look at another indicator, and this one is really interesting. This is the U.S. retail sales. And you can see, by the way, these blue lines here are recessions. This is the big banking crisis. We are still in a recession, and so it's growing, but this is the COVID recession. But notice what happened to retail sales ex gasoline, just absolutely nosedived. Same thing happened with retail and food services that included the gasoline. But notice what's happened. We are now back above levels that we were pre-COVID. So when you look at all of these things, again, we're seeing improved consumer confidence. And that's really critical. So we've got improving analyst confidence, we've got improving business confidence, and we've got improving consumer confidence. So the question has to be asked, what could go wrong? And that's where we come up to the next graph, which tells us what we have to be looking at as we deal with COVID. It does not look like at this point in time that we will have a vaccine that is going to be out where it can hit the general public in the United States and around the world this fall, and actually probably well into the winter, if at all, at that point in time. And so that brings us to this chart. And this is what we're looking at, and that's flu season. Flu season, as you can see, begins in earnest around December. And this was last year's flu season. You can see it topped in January, February, and the influenza then went away. What happens is when you start to see flu season occur, the issues can come up that influenza does attack the respiratory system, which weakens a person's ability to fight off COVID. So if we have this type of situation and we start to hit the middle of December with a very active flu season, then we're going to probably be looking at the possibility of additional shutdowns and additional concerns and an additional spike to COVID. Now, again, we don't know, but it's something that we're going to put on the list that says this is what could go wrong. What happens in that case is that we would definitely see mills, rice mills probably close. We could see export facilities close in. It could have a dramatic impact on rice prices. And so those are the areas that we have to look ahead and say, okay, we know that's possible. So let's make sure we're taking a good job of planning around that kind of condition. So there you have it. That's the market outlook right now. We're looking at the supply situation, exactly as we've gone through the world supply, and we've covered the COVID situation. So let me give you my final thoughts here in regards to what we've gone through and some of the market conditions. First of all, U.S. supply is going to be larger, but again, it's going to take some time to fill in the holes. It may not be that rice is just abundantly available like it has been in years past, because of the conditions that we have here going on in the States and the holes that are probably going to have to be filled up. So just be aware of that. U.S. supply larger, but just as Thomas went through, you may not see the big price break that you would normally see accompany this type of a large increase in yield. When you look at the world market, it's vulnerable to supply issues, especially with all the rice that we've shown you is in India. So there is a very good chance that you're going to see prices worldwide remain elevated at least into 2021. It's going to take us a while probably to get through that, especially as countries want to make sure they have enough rice in their own country before they do any type of export work. And finally, I'll just say COVID-19, it's better as confidence improves, but I have to say we are not even close to normal. We are far from normal at this particular point in time. So those are the things that I'm thinking about. And as I go through all of the different areas and markets from a technical standpoint, we made new contract highs in futures today. In the November contract, we think that it could continue to work higher. We noticed that there's some commercial fund buying. So money managers have an interest in the market right now. Commercials are certainly looking at trying to get some coverage. And now all of a sudden we have weather that we may have to start working with and looking at as well. So I'd be more than happy to try to answer any questions. And I'm going to pass this back over to Veronica, and I'll do that right now, Marcella.
Thank you, Dennis. Let's see if we have some questions for you.
We don't have any yet.
We did have one for Thomas, but I'm gonna, oh yeah, we do have one for you. Can you see that, Dennis?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good question for Dwight, actually. I'm assuming it would be milled, but I'm gonna let Dwight answer that question.
Was it-
So the question is, if Brazil buys a bunch of rice, will it be patty or white? And which country will they buy more from?
Well, Veronica, you'll have
It's
to
5 o'clock.
start my video, I think. I don't think I can. I'm unable to. Not that you need to see my ugly face, but let me say that it's going to be largely patty, in my opinion. All of the inquiries up to now have been on patty
Oh.
rice.
Just 1 second. So the translation picks it up. We're gonna put up
Perdón. Estoy hablando con Dennis.
you can talk English. It's gonna pick up the translation now.
Okay, mira, en opinión mío va a ser patty principalmente, si no 100% quizás. Hay un arancel sobre patty y blanco, creo que es 10% en patty y 12% en arroz blanco sobre el valor CIF. Yo entiendo que el sector brasilero de arroz está solicitando que el gobierno elimina en ese momento por seguridad alimentaria, eliminar ese arancel, pero hay comentarios que no se van a eliminar porque necesitan el dinero para sus programas social, asistir a la gente. Ustedes saben que Brasil tiene 35 millones de personas que ni tiene agua corriente y la pobreza es fuerte y el consumo de arroz es fundamental, pero todas las indicaciones por el momento es sobre arroz paddy. ¿Algo más?
There was a question for Thomas that Renzo. We are concerned about the quality of the grain of this harvest. Can you be more specific? Thomas, can I send it over to you?
Certainly. I answered it in the Q&A box, but I can answer it for everybody else. The limited number of samples that we've seen so far, I can't give much more than a lower milling yield expectation, and I'm drawing a lot of that conclusion from the consistent weather patterns we're seeing across the growing regions. We have seen a lot more chalk in the grains than we would normally associate with a first crop harvest. However, on a good note, we have not seen any smut at all on the limited that we have seen so far. The next few weeks will be very illuminating as it comes to telling us what we'll be dealing with. However, the bids on the higher milling rice have gone up dramatically in the domestic market. So the buyers are purchasing or trying to pick up those lots as quickly as possible.
Thomas, there's another one on the screen. I don't know if you could read it. Is there correlation between high rice prices and high COVID-19 contagion countries? Or if that's for Dennis or Thomas.
So from my standpoint, and I'll answer quickly, there is some correlation, but it doesn't have as much to do with demand as it does with supply. Much like we've seen in the meat processing industry, the rice processing, in this instance, the rice mills have had difficulties meeting some of their commitments into the milled domestic markets as a result of outturns or nobody showing up to work. And that's translated into higher rice prices on the shelf. As far as to higher paddy prices, I wouldn't say that there's a correlation from what I've observed. Dennis may have a different opinion.
Dennis,
No, I'm sorry. No, I don't have a different opinion. I think that very well describes it.
Marcella, you got another couple of questions there.
Yeah. Thomas or Dennis, do you want to take the first one? Any comments on Indian rice qualities, big inventories, but can they be exported to the world market? So,
I don't think we know the answer to that, but I think there is definitely some concern that the quality may not be there, that they may not be able to export that. It's kind of like China. China has a huge amount of rice, but I don't know. We don't know exactly what kind of quality that it has. So I think it's something that could certainly be an issue at some point in time, but I really don't know. I mean, I think it's difficult to imagine where they could put 38 million metric tons of rice in a storage position. That's almost mind blowing to me.
is,
The next question was, so the estimate for this year's crop on acreage and yield is basically 20% more than 2019. That is an estimate of how many more tons in patty basis. Well, if we're at 25 million, we're talking about a carryover number bigger of about 10 million hundredweights. So what would that be? 10, about what, 500,000 metric tons?
Yeah.
So that's what that would be my guess from a patty standpoint.
any other questions? We'll give it a.
And I just to clarify, that's the carryover. If you're talking about actual production, actual production is up. What is it? 30 million hundredweights. So it'd be. I mean, the actual production is up substantially, but again, we're filling in the holes.
I'm trying to see if there's any other questions that are coming in. We'll give it a couple other minutes. So I'll just kind of fill in some space here to allow for other questions. I'll say it in English just for our other attendees that are participating. So we will be sending out an email tomorrow. You'll be getting out an email from the same source that you got today, the link with some survey questions. So please go ahead and answer those. We would love to hear your comments, your feedback. We would, want to continue to have seminars like this, so we would definitely want your feedback on that. And I don't see any other questions coming in. So I'll hand it over to Dwight. Oh, are we going to receive the presentations? I will ask my colleague Veronica.
Do they want us to see them?
So we have been recording this the seminar, so we will be able to share the seminar itself. I think I need to ask here in the office the expert on that because I don't know. So
We will be sending a link to everybody who registered for the seminar, a link so they can review the presentation afterwards, the video. Okay.
okay. ¿Alguna otra preguntita? Bueno, se lo paso a Dwight.
Ok, mira, ya hace una hora, poco más que una hora, esa era la idea. Sabemos que ustedes están muy ocupados como acá, la rutina es tan diferente hoy en día. Estamos agradecidos, ojalá que este reunión Zoom, que es la norma hoy en día en adelante, fue algo útil para ustedes. Quizás es un poco temprano en un sentido sobre la cosecha porque nos faltan unos días. Yo sé que en Arkansas están secando, haciendo drenaje del agua en algunos campos en el sur de Arkansas, pero vamos a mantener informado de hoy en adelante. Estoy agradecido, preocupo de ustedes en cada país. Yo miro las condiciones diariamente en cada uno de los países, especialmente en Latinoamérica. Suerte a ustedes. Espero que sigan sano y seguro. Cualquier cosa que la oficina de US Rice Producers puede ser útil para ustedes, no esperen preguntar. Que pasan bien. Gracias.